If you could please, everybody take a seat. This seminar will also be streamed, so that's why we always start right on time. And it's 1 p.m. My name is Sylvia Schwagsberger. I'm a professor of research policy and president of the Swedish Royal Academy of Engineering. And I am extremely pleased to welcome you to the seminar. There's a lot of work that's gone into the seminar, and we're really happy to finally be organizing the seminar at our academy on China's industrial and technological rise, perspectives, lessons, and challenges. And I want to thank the fellows at the Academy that have been very strongly involved in organizing this event. And I also want to thank all of you for coming. I think we've put together an interesting program where you will really get firsthand insights from what it is like to do business, but also to do technological development in China and manufacture in China. And also we have Europe's largest think tank on China, MERICS, based in Berlin, which I think is I am very pleased that we managed to get them here, not least the head of MERICS, Mikko Huotari, and also the leading think tank when it comes to China's industrial policy and technology in Europe, without a doubt, I would say. So this will be our program, and then we will finish off with a panel of eminent experts on trade, on China, on technology in China. So I'm very much looking forward to that too. And we're hoping to get also participation from the audience. So if you want to say something, please remember that there are microphones next to your seats, and please keep the questions very short, and also introduce yourself before you say something. So with those words, I maybe will just say 2 words about my connection to China. Well, it's a very long connection. I am half Chinese origin. My mother was a 3rd-generation immigrant to China from Honolulu. I have apparently a family tree that goes 24 generations back in China, which is quite unusual. But more importantly, I was the technical attaché in Beijing. I've spent the last 20 years trying to study science and technology policy, trying to understand China, and I realized that I never fully will, which means that there will always be something to do, even in retirement for me. But it's I think, one of the big enigmas and challenges of our times to understand how China works and what it means for the world. So that is why I am personally so pleased that we could organize this event, and I hope you will find it interesting and rewarding. So with that, I would like to ask Mikko to join me on stage. Mikko is the director of MERICS. He has a PhD from the University of Freiburg. Also, not least, just briefly, Mikko and his think tank, they organized the China track at the Munich Security Conference. And you not recently returned from Beijing after having been there with the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. So I think there are many angles we can cover in this time. So, but I would hand over to you to give us your presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Sylvia. Thank you so much. Usually I start with a joke that I'm not a Japanese girl because of my name, but it doesn't work here. So anyway, good afternoon. I'm excited to be joining this seminar. I agree with you, Sylvia. It's probably one of the most profound questions that we have to ask ourselves. What does China's global technological rise do to globalization, to geopolitics, to our corporate successes? So I look forward to the engagement throughout the day with you today. I hope this is working. Maybe, wrong button, yeah. Let me start with the question, what is China up to? With a dramatic simplification, to start with the ambition, and I think we can encapsulate this with this sentence. It's a largely self-sufficient, self-reliant industrial superpower. That's what they're aiming for, and if you look at some indicators here, the target of AI penetration, for instance, that has been recently set until 2030, 90% across all businesses. It's largely supply chain control to an extent that we wouldn't even imagine. In strategic sectors, it is to own the 4th industrial revolution as much as possible, and it's to be #1 in global standards. Now, that's very abstract. We are very lucky that we're meeting here just a few days after CCP Inc., as I would call it, has just once more updated its objectives and key results document. They're quite corporate about this. You can look at the 15th five-year plan and its indicator system as a good starting point if you want to understand where China is heading. Also, it is a key document for us to assess what we're actually competing against, because we're not competing against individual companies in China. We're competing against an industrial base that is steered in a pretty systematic way by the Communist Party. Now, the indicators have stayed the same. It's 20 indicators last year, it's 20 indicators this year. There's not a significant shift that you could immediately read out of this, so it's important to dig a little bit deeper. And we've done this, of course, since last Friday when the report was published. Two things that we can start with. There's a target for the society-wide R&D expenditure growth, and it's above 7%, which is unchanged, but China has dramatically surpassed that goal in the past five-year period. What's interesting is a specific target that has near doubled from 12% to 22%. And it's the high-value invention patents per 10,000 population. So super high ambitions regarding the actual progress on the science and technology front at the 20 indicator list that steers everything in terms of macroeconomic development and strategy in China. Now, there's more layers that you can look at the 15th five-year plan that are indicative of what China wants. It's what priorities do they set? And one quite interesting change compared to the previous 5 years is it's this shift that innovation really should serve the industrial base. So previously, science, tech, innovation, self-reliance was the second most important target. Now it's downgraded, it's still very important, but the industrial base really is at the heart of it. So innovation now is serving the industrial base. There's other indicators here. I think we have to take it seriously that China's leadership is quite worried about the population more broadly. So there's new measures, goals, also initiatives to help shape a childbirth-friendly society, silver economy. So there's many things that China is changing below this 20 indicator billboard that they've set for themselves. So the first one and the fifth one are probably the ones that we're looking at here today the most. AI has seen the sharpest relative surge in terms of importance. That's not surprising, but it's quite significant because effectively what China is trying to do here is to treat the entire AI stack as a one state-directed chain. And that's something we need to look at in more detail. Now, some more indicators here that help you understand the plan. This is word counting, so certainly superficial assessment, but again, maybe helps to highlight what are priorities, what's not important. The science, tech, and innovation system is absolutely central to the leadership's thinking about its own future. This is what probably a country like Sweden also has on its mind when it thinks about its future. I'm not sure whether it's the same across Europe. So they're radically focused on science, tech, innovation, progress as much as possible. There's the 15th five-year plan. There's also the government work report. So that's what they're doing next year, not just the next 5 years. And again, if you look at the priorities, number 2 and number 3 is the industrial system, productive forces, science and technology. This is what the government says. These are our priorities. So it's good that we talk about this topic because China really takes this extremely seriously. Now, that's ambition. What's the machinery behind it? Why is China where it is today, and how will it move forward? I want to start with a little bit of backup in terms of history. China is not a newcomer to doing industrial policy, for sure. If you look back roughly 20 years, first stage of sophisticated planning around strategic emerging industries, then probably around 2016, a shift towards what they have called internally an innovation-driven development strategy. Previously, it was not, in their perspective, innovation-driven. Why? Because they had so much catch-up to do regarding its industrial build-up. And then there's a stage that's probably driven by global developments, including the Trump administration first trade war. It's a self-reliance-driven industrial policy, and they're all stacked upon each other. So the first phase is not gone. Second phase, innovation-driven development, is also not gone. But this is what I'm trying to tell you here is basically a layered system of industrial policies that continues to shape China's economic performance. One particularly important strategy that everyone has heard about is the Made in China 2025 strategy in 2015. So it was a 10-year plan. And I think it's important for us to take a step back and maybe look at the past 10 years, what has happened, as an indicator of what China is capable of, and maybe also to learn a little bit more about the machinery behind it. I want to start by maybe acknowledging the immense build-up of industrial capacity that China has achieved. And these are structural inputs that will not go away. So this is the baseline of what China has achieved and will also continue to achieve moving forward. There's infrastructure, it's well known. It is an unmatched logistics backbone. There's the talent pipeline. I think that's now a fact. The STEM graduates, the STEM PhDs, there's an unmatched talent depth in China. And the execution capacity that Western firms are seeking is hard to match without such talent. There is an investment in industrial policy that has recently been assessed by the IMF to be at 4 to 5% of China's GDP. So there's a significant floor of money that is being channeled into industrial development. This compares to roughly 1.5% in the European Union. So it's just triple the amount of money is available in the system to support industrial development. And we don't have to debate how dramatic that is or unfair. It's just a fact to start with. It's a different starting point for competition with China. Then there's top-down steering. I mentioned the objectives and key results system that they operate under. But there's also, and we can measure this, there is a super high degree of implementation from the center to local governance entities. And that has actually increased over the past 15 years dramatically. Is that good or not? Well, there was always a theory that decentralized development in China is what it makes it actually successful. But at least we know if the center says something, it becomes local reality, at least with a greater likelihood than compared to a decentralized economy in Germany, for instance. And then it's probably the most important success factor. It's cutthroat intra-provincial competition. So provinces compete for resources, for GDP targets, for FDI, central approval, and that really makes China a place where local experiment, but also local performance is shaping scale nationally. Now that's inputs, right? That's the systemic features. But what do they do to bring this to life in concrete measures? How does that work? There's a thing that is really about orchestration. So you have the government acting as a matchmaker. It connects researchers, technology providers, and end users firms in a way that we don't do here. So you have hundreds of these active consortia that shape industrial policy and innovation policy. You have, and this is critically important compared to our science and innovation systems, you have publications, i.e. our traditional benchmark for success as an academic, are being downgraded compared to, does your publication actually lead to an industrial outcome? Now, all of us have Max Planck societies or other societies that are geared at actually using academic outputs for industrial development, but China is really changing the balance of that significantly over the past 10 years. Also, SOE, state-owned enterprises' profit targets have been downgraded and replaced by innovation KPIs. So, again, something that makes a difference at the end of the day. Little giants, you may have heard about that. My colleague Alex Brown, who is in the room here, has written a fantastic report about this. We're currently in the 6th round of funding and selecting little giants. What is that? The specialized SMEs that actually fill specific gaps, which means that they don't want to have foreign suppliers in these specific gaps anymore. Supply chain architects as a mechanism. So there's a coordinated approach to actually look at the supply chain and fill the gaps with Chinese companies. There's currently around 15,000 little giants. If just 10% of them succeed, you have 1,500 companies that will compete with all of you internationally. Zoning and clusters, not too new, but I think underestimated in terms of the performance today. And there's vertical integration by design. Of course, there's the state asset steering through the SOEs, but there's also inside companies, the conglomerates, are pretty forceful in terms of shaping its own value chains and building full control as much as possible. Now, getting a little bit more to the substance. Just one example, BYD versus Tesla. In 5 years, we see a complete reversal of fortunes internationally in terms of market capture. So the question is that a pattern? Is that repeatable? Will it happen to us? Has it happened to us? Yes. And I think it's good for us to look a little bit at the pattern behind that. Sorry, this is thing dropping here. So, Made in China 2025 is a good indicator because that's where you could benchmark what they wanted to achieve and what they have achieved 10 years ago. And they identified 10 core industries, ranging from EV, energy, equipment, and railway, where we already see the global success, obviously. It's hard to compete in that space and to exist anymore, almost. And there's other sectors where there was less progress. But overall, if you think in grand historical terms, there's probably never been a country that has achieved this catch-up in a short time span of 10 years, from being relatively disadvantaged to largely dominant in certain sectors here, to very advanced, or at least being in a game of rapid catch-up. So when China sets its eyes on a certain target, a colleague from Denmark, who's currently leading the European Chamber of Commerce, has said, if you find your industry or your product in China's 15th five-year plan, it's a kiss of death. Not sure whether that's true or not, but I think it's an indicator of at least strategic attention that's required if you look at those plans and goals and targets. Mind you, this is just 2025. So 2035, there's another layer of goals that they want to achieve, and then obviously being the leading manufacturing superpower in 2049. So that's what we are looking at in terms of potential on the Chinese side. And the objectives are well defined, right? And it's systematic. First, you decrease your import dependency, and that can be done by actually luring in foreign companies, because then you're not dependent on imports from other countries. Then you reduce foreign firm dependence, second layer. It's all spelled out, right? It's not, I'm not inventing that. Then you achieve global competitiveness, and then ideally you become a global technological leader. And all of this is measured, and your performance indicators as a company work around those goals. So this is something that has been called a tournament model, because China is not betting on companies. It's not picking winners. It's not saying, this company, you have to do that. It's smarter industrial policy than that. It builds the arena in which a race takes place, and that can be SOEs, companies, private companies, and it bets on certain races, i.e. technology clusters in particular. So, and the phases are well established. There's first a policy that creates a sheltered market environment, then there's vicious domestic competition. This is where you have I think the logic of China really being an extreme market economy in some ways in this protected arena. And then there's excess capacity, there's a shakeout, there's the export valve that serves as a way to continue to grow internationally. And then eventually you have battle-tested survivors that go global. And fewer of them and much bigger ones. And this has played out. I think Swedish companies have felt some of that in the past. So across these phases, tech attraction, you're being lured in. Home market consolidation, you're being increasingly pushed out. Third market expansion of Chinese companies, their innovation leadership, and eventually also shaping the global rules around industrial development. This has happened in rail, in telecoms, in electric vehicles. It's certainly going to happen in other domains and arenas again. Now, this fourth phase is where we, in many sectors, are currently in. China is laying the foundation for its own innovation leadership, right? It's not just a catch-up race for third market competition. And that works quite well. I think, Sylvia, you've studied this for a long time. I must say I am still shocked and surprised by the speed of development that we've seen in this arena. So 10 out of 15 leading academic research institutions are today in China. One in Europe. That's the Nature Index of last year. 3 out of 6 leading global innovation clusters are in China. There's none in Germany. I'm not sure whether Stockholm counts in the top 20 here. So these are fundamentally different foundations for China's next stage. They have the pipeline of research, of patents, of talent, of companies, and in that sense, competing from a different, really, base here. And that expanding R&D base already leads to a situation where most industry experts see China either on eye level or leading or rapidly catching up across key industries that will all shape our competitive position, but also our future. There's the Australian Strategic Policy Institute that assesses that for 37 out of 43 technologies, China is actually leading in terms of the patent and research base. Now, what does China do and what does it want with that in the coming 5 years? It's going to brute force techno-industrial success. That's how I would frame it. There's a list of industries, there's a list of technologies where it seeks decisive breakthroughs. It has identified future industries, emerging industries that it still wants to capture, traditional industries where it doesn't want to give up its competitive position. So it's really everything all the time, all at once. What you usually have is that when countries advance along the value chain, you give up lower value chain segments. That's not happening in China currently because it's a catch-all economy. You still have the need to have those lower value added companies, at least in the perspective of the Chinese leadership. And it's not a static system. I'm just using this slide. This is 13th, 14th, and 15th five-year plan. Industries that they have identified for priority access to capital, for tax incentives, for other forms of support. And it's adjusting, right? Most interesting that I find is new energy vehicles, rail transport equipment. The globally leading companies, no support anymore. So this is, it's happening, it works, right? And low altitude economy, expect them in 5 years to be significantly advanced. And so it's a dynamic system where they make choices, they make lots of mistakes, they waste a lot of money, but it produces results that are actually quite impressive. So what do we know about where and why China wins and fails? It's difficult. It's hard to predict. But there's some patterns that one can recognize. The colleague at CSIS in Washington done this study just a month ago. China succeeds where the entry barriers are relatively medium, where fierce competition is possible and scale matters. It doesn't where there's a significant tech barrier and incumbents actually protect their advantages forcefully, and where the government must really create new firms from scratch. So these are the patterns that international China researchers who work on these topics for decades have identified. China still fails significantly, but the radical nature it is trying to catch up also in those domains we'll touch upon in a minute. So when the leadership in the past 6 to 9 months speaks about the need for extraordinary measures for self-sufficiency, we have to take that extremely seriously. I mean, it has Maoist overtones in terms of the alertness and the prioritization. So you can basically say they will do everything, no matter the cost, to achieve control over those value chains and advance as much as possible. So this is the kiss of death stuff. Here I would be really careful. And it's 6 sectors: integrated circuits, machine tools, high-end precision instruments, basic software, advanced materials, and biomanufacturing. So this is a space where you will not compete with singular companies, you will compete with the Chinese state. What will they put on the table for that? First of all, a lot of money. And this is degrees of abstraction if you start with a fiscal stance, but there's also new policy-backed financial instruments. I found interesting this ultra-long special treasury bond that was just announced. Why? It has a bracket there that says 800 billion yuan for national strategies without specifying further. 800 billion for national, so, and that's a lot, but it's also largely about these 6 breakthrough domains. So there's money in the system, prioritized, it's packaged away, there's no accountability for that necessarily in an international sense. So this is going to make a huge difference. There's new re-lending facility for tech innovation and transformation. And then there's new thinking about capital markets, about patient capital as investment. So they're also building up the financial system around tech development in a pretty radical way. And I'll go through 3 domains and then hope to come to what all of this means internationally, but also for us in Europe. When we think about AI regulation and the care that we need on that, for China, it's a state mission. There's this new formula now, more yin yin yang, models, chips, cloud applications, all of that needs to be steered from a centralized perspective to create a national system around this. And we've all heard about DeepSeek last year. We also understand, I think, the intensity with which China is working on its chips industry to build a Chinese ASML, which is still out of reach, but it's an explicit goal. Hyperscale computing clusters, access to computing all across the country. There's the AI Plus action plan that really is meant to spread and diffuse AI use across all industries. So it's a pretty diffusion-first strategy that is absolutely in contrast to what the United States is trying to do in that space. And it's also more attuned with what probably Europeans would try to do, because it's about industrial AI effectively. For semiconductors, it's the same story. Top priority, you effectively have a semi-private and a state-led effort here, SMIC and Huawei, both of them competing to build the semiconductor industry. Ren Zhengfei, the boss of Huawei, says they want to have 70% self-sufficiency by 2028, and I mean, they will probably achieve that, and it's quite remarkable how much effort they put into this. We have seen massive waste in this sector. Big funds have been set up to spread money into the system, but it still continues. You have another 60 billion euros currently mobilized for additional subsidies planned, and this will make a difference moving forward. And export controls, the key tool that the United States was trying to use to shape China's ecosystem, has probably been the biggest catalyst for China's success in this field. Embodied AI is, I think, where the future is heading. You have data at scale. There are state-funded robot training farms. Not sure we have that in Germany or in Sweden. We have industrialization of components, motors, batteries that basically come from the EV supply chain. You have a price advantage that is pretty difficult for us to match. You have standards as an accelerator, still years from completion, but still moving ahead in terms of setting standards for components, integration, safety, ethics, all of that. So it's a full program. It's pretty coordinated from the top. And then you have simply this density of deployment. The Walker S2 at BYD, Geely, Volkswagen, VW, Foxconn, Airbus, all of them are the experimental domains for robotics companies that are building those new connective tissues between the industry and AI. And the price difference is remarkable here. This is a calculation done by Morgan Stanley. If you compare actuators, it's a 2.6 times price premium that you pay for a non-Chinese humanoid robot cost. Same for chips and software. So that's hard. It's hard for us to compete with that price advantage, as it has been in other industries in the past. So, 3 quick points on China's global positioning. And again, I'm using the 15th five-year plan because it's so current and it gives you an indication at least of what's happening. 5 years ago, China was still talking about becoming a member of CPTPP, a regional trade agreement that shapes Asia-Pacific, but increasingly also global trade. It's been toned down now. I think sovereignty is much more prominent compared to global integration at the moment. 5 years ago, it was really more about R&D, tax incentives, so enabling markets. Today, it's more about, here are 6 choke point sectors, state-directed efforts will be guided at solving those problems. So it's more back to a command economy style. Then you have, a very strong language on market opening, but there's a very important caveat there. It basically says opening, but self-guided. So. And there's talk about also the use of building counter-sanctions, tools, etc. So it's more defensive, retaliatory at the moment. And what worries me most, frankly, although I find it rational and understand it, is the language around self-sufficiency, the preparing for extreme scenarios. You have a segment of the Chinese economy that is basically becoming a war economy. So they're preparing for war and building what they call a strategic hinterland. They are building duplicate industrial capacity. The most important increases in targets in the 15th five-year plan are around energy security and food security. So they're preparing for a world where there will be much more turbulence. And frankly, they're vindicated by developments currently, right? You better have a good stockpile of oil resources at the moment. Second, so China is shifting its outlook on the world to a more defensive, resilience-oriented one. Second point that I wanted to make is about the topic of dependency. Now, Xi has a vision for that, making the world more dependent on China and China less dependent on the world. I think that's a rational and reasonable proposition for someone who steers his own country. But again, it's a topic where I'm personally shocked about the speed of development. If you just look back 20 years ago, we assess critical dependencies according to an international benchmark. Again, colleagues doing the work, China has radically decreased its dependency on the US, on Europe, while we have significantly increased our dependence on China. Not a new story, but it's one where a leader in China obviously is very proud of. Here again, China reducing its trade dependencies from the US, EU, and Japan from roughly 75% to 25% from 2000 to 2022. So that's a dramatically different China. It doesn't need us anymore that much, of course. Standards, a topic I think that is of great interest also for an engineering society as this one, and certainly also in Germany. If the benchmark is the United States or the EU, if you look at the numbers of secretariats, of members in ITU, of the working groups, China has the largest national presence, the largest number of chair seats. It's almost equal in terms of secretariats for ISO. So this is a different player today that is actually shaping this environment significantly. What does all of this mean for us? I have tried to think a little bit about where we actually are in terms of this, our relationship to this land of opportunities. And what's the nature of these opportunities? And I think we are at a very critical moment because inside companies, you suddenly have different rationales in your China business, and they point into fundamentally different directions, and you have a tension between national or European industrial base and company success. So we started with an in-China opportunity, and don't take this too seriously. I was looking for symbols of that kind of model. It's very simplified, of course, right? It's market seeking in China, Volkswagen, success story, peak probably around 2010, since then decreasing market shares, etc. Then there's this from China, so using China as a global manufacturing hub story, which again peaks a little bit later. 2015, highest concentration of Apple's sourcing from China in collaboration with China. And then is the period, I think that, company Volvo car was probably most prominent, or in Germany, Mercedes, seeking investment from China, but also a deep strategic partnership with China as part of a success model. Around 2010, maybe, and building up from that. That there's a without China story, either by force, because you're not letting into the market, or because you're diversifying, and that is also taking up. And increasingly, I think there's an against China story. If you think about it, there's companies who are building their strategies by actually doubling down on this tech competition, but also the security and the strategic competition with China. So in a way, if you look at the moment where we are today, it's complete confusion. Right? We can have fundamentally different China strategies that all seem legitimate, and the path forward is quite contested, again, internally, but also because the problem here is this is about corporate success. If you add to that the question, what does it actually do to your industrial base if China as a place becomes more successful? I think we are entering very, very difficult territory. And I want to use a chart from a recent report to make this a bit more visible here. This is what you mean when you talk about the second China shock. China shock has been used as a term to analytically describe, it sounds very dramatic, but the displacement of manufacturing jobs in the United States between 2000 and 2010, roughly. Why? Because China was competing heavily with the industrial midland. A similar story is playing out in Europe as we speak. You have around 500 industrial jobs being lost per day. In Germany alone, 120,000 industrial jobs over the past 12 months. So this is a high-speed development, and this indicates where jobs will be lost most. Now you can say, well, here's a German think tank speaking about this problem. You will recognize your country as also being at least potentially affected significantly by this. In the United States, there's this theory, and you can discuss it. I think it's at least a factor that the China shock was a feature in shaping the MAGA movement. We have a debate in Germany about the China shock shaping the rise of the AfD and the right-wing nationalists. I'm not sure about the Swedish debate, but I find it important that we recognize all of this has dramatic political consequences. Now, we are getting to this guy in a moment. But can we just sit back and maybe relax a little bit about this? Isn't this just normal? China rises, it becomes more successful. It's a rebalancing of economic fortunes. Isn't that just fair, historically? And it may be, and shouldn't we simply ask, can European companies outcompete the rest of the world again by just being faster and better in China? That was a recipe for success for many European companies. On the left side, you see European investment in China. On the right side, you see Chinese investment in Europe. And these are different scales here. So we are currently roughly at, it's been decreasing a little bit, but 12 billion euros European investment in China, and this is also approaching. So we're equal. China invests as much in Europe as Europeans in China. So solid situation. What's interesting also, China is investing increasingly in greenfield investment, less M&A, also very healthy state of affairs, one could say. So I think that is part of the story. There's a corporate reality that basically says, well, China is fast, we have to be there, let's do it. That's it. What I'm worried about is that this narrative doesn't connect back to what it actually means to be in China today. So this is car industry, sorry, Germany. Foreign OEMs estimated China profits from 2015 to 2025, roughly. Okay, that's a well-known story. It's simply the success of Chinese competitors. But if you combine that with the other slide on part of the slide, it's the same companies doubling down on investment in China. So we have to spend much more money in actually to achieve much less success. Is that a sustainable state of affairs? I think at least I would put a question mark behind that. So, and then you add this, it's not me, it's President of the European Chamber of Commerce, he speaks for all these companies represented here, I'm not sure, and speaks of a train crash in slow motion. Why? Because of massive overcapacity, growing uncertainty for European companies. So the broader picture of success in China, I think, is at least in doubt if someone like him speaks so frankly about this. I can also report that in Brussels, in Berlin, in Paris, maybe those places who don't have that strong industrial engineering base compared to Sweden, the concerns are massive. And it's already visible. We are becoming much more protectionist in Europe, and that's a trend that will certainly not go away easily. And, you know, without specifying what the right solutions are, I think we have to admit that it is a problem when a country that has, you know, around 30% of global manufacturing does that without constraints. So for Sweden, for Germany, we policymakers, for instance, are hesitant to criticize China because of its export performance, right? Why? Because we're doing the same. We're export-driven economies. So we are also flooding global markets with our goods. But the reality is, if a company doesn't make profit in Germany, it goes bankrupt, and the same is in Sweden. It's not the case in China at all. Since more than 10 years, they're speaking about zombie companies everywhere, which is basically companies who don't make any profit, but still continue to live. And that's the problem that we are facing here. It's not normal competition. So if you have 30% of global manufacturing, but 30% of these companies are loss-making, the average industrial company in China today is loss-making. That's not a healthy state of competition, not a state of fair competition that I think we should accept. Then you look at a number like this. China's, you know, this is imports relative to 2019 and its exports relative to 2019. The FT had an article in December last year. What will China actually still import from the rest of the world? And I think it's a legitimate question, because the goal is to import as little as possible in terms of advanced industrial goods, at least, because that's where you make most profit. And the story here is not to give that profit to international companies. So you have this massive record trade deficit or surplus that China has with the world. Historical achievement has never been there in the past, something that we have to take seriously as a fundamental condition for engaging with China moving forward. And what that means in practice is that European companies on third markets at home effectively face, because the Chinese currency is undervalued, according to IMF, all international economists who look at it seriously, but also because China has the longest streak of deflation of producer prices of, you know, between 20 and 40% of just what you would call traditionally unfair price competition. Not sustainable. It will wipe out large parts of European industry. And it's happening. This is a starting graph on the right side. Now, again, it's Germany specific. I do apologize for that. But that's trade in investment goods, capital goods, change in 2025, the balance between China and Germany. So it is as if someone was waiting for this to simply switch, right? This is the speed of development that's happening currently. We see a cratering of European exports to China that is not fully digested internationally. This is an assessment by Goldman Sachs. It basically calculates, you can take that with a grain of salt, what's the effect of China's export growth if it continues at 5% moving forward for the next 5 years. And it's a negative effect for growth in Germany, but also other economies. Unfortunately, Sweden was not on this list, of minus 2.5%, minus 0.25%. Now that's important. If you just grow by 1%, you have an annual minus 0.25% because of China's export growth success story. We shouldn't blame them for that. It's good to be successful, but it's not a sustainable condition if that happens on terms that are not fair, at least according to what we are used to. So, I think the result here is, and I will end with that slide to leave a little bit of space for discussion. While Sweden and Swedish companies might feel confident about the future of their competitiveness vis-à-vis China, I think we're dealing with a fundamentally different beast here. And the conditions for fair competition, but also for success in China, I think are changing dramatically. And our response so far is, we still want to be largely in this trusted open relationship. We've entered a little bit, a period where we want to leverage also strategic competition. We want to diversify. There's more industrial policy. The Industrial Accelerator Act in Brussels is the example, right? We're doing a little bit of that. But the reality is that China and the US are playing a completely different game. And we will continue to have success by integrating more in the Chinese and the American ecosystems. But what does it do to Europe? I think that's the core question that I'm asking tonight or this afternoon. And look forward to the conversation around this. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mikko. Thank you. So many interesting things to bring up here. I want to open if there are any questions or comments that anybody would like to make. And while you're preparing, potentially, I think there are so many things you sort of just managed to touch upon. One of the things you just managed to say at the end, which is, this seminar focuses on China, but we also have another superpower that is also engaging in practices that we're finding hard to deal with, right? So we're in a way squeezed in between these that have sort of, interestingly, on the one hand, are both embracing capitalism and fierce competition within their domestic economies, but are quite willing right now to abandon free market principles internationally.
I agree, and I wouldn't be able to assess the size of the challenge in a comparative way. I think the more acute probably feels is coming from the United States because it's so, it's happening on a weekly, monthly basis. We're back to Section 301 trade tariff threats right now. China is not doing that. It's a more sustained onslaught of industrial power that we are facing, which is also, in my view, not according to OECD standards, let's put it that way. And we're just not used to that.
No.
So the rule book that we have, our thinking around long-term success, I think all of that needs to be adjusted to these new realities.
I mean, one question I would like to ask, because I share this. I think this development is, I think you portrayed it very well, this sort of long-term. And as we know, when I was based in Beijing in 2006, we could see this coming. That's when China started talking about indigenous innovation, the dual circulation strategy, which there's like you said, there's a sort of continuity and a long-term vision in that. But my question, I guess, would be, is there something, what we haven't talked about, and I think what the panel will talk about at the end, is of course that China is also facing quite daunting challenges itself, right? So I guess, is there something that risks derailing this?
So this is one of two presentations that I currently give. And sometimes I do them together, but then it's too long. This is the presentation about 30% of China's economy and the one that is functioning, strategic, well-organized, super high speed. There's another presentation about 70% of the Chinese economy where you have massive problems. And unfortunately, both of these generate problems for us. So it's not that because of China's weakness, we can sit back and relax. Because they're interlinked. If you have a lack of demand in the Chinese economy because of these 70% that are not creating that demand, it means that the production of that country needs to go somewhere else, and that's the overcapacity surplus story that is hitting us so hard at the moment. It means that European companies are less needed for those 70% because there's zero growth there. You hear the official figures, 5%, it's probably around 2 to 3%, if at all. And you have long-term structural challenges in the Chinese economy, from demography to other factors that I'm happy to go into detail, but again, it's another presentation.
Exactly, and I think we will touch upon that hopefully in the panel. I think just another thing, and please raise your hands if you have questions or comments, but another thing that I find fascinating that you also just touched upon, which is this notion how China has been extremely successful. It's so funny how, I mean, first China had this huge focus on becoming a research superpower, but it's now also at the forefront of rethinking, right? I mean, now that Europe is waking up to the fact that maybe we've also been a little bit, our whole academic system has been focused maybe a little too much, yes, right, on quantity of publications, academic publications. China is now at the forefront saying we're actually going to reward less academic publications and more whether they generate, yeah, right. And also I think, as some of you may have read, I think they have just recently introduced, or some of the universities' idea that you can get a PhD without actually producing a thesis, like a doctoral thesis. You can get a PhD on the basis of producing a world-leading product or developing a world-leading technological breakthrough. So very interesting. I think these are the things where China is now. I mean, to be honest, I wrote papers in 2017 on China's catch-up, but I'm wondering if we can, when we're going to catch up in some of this thinking. I have a question there and a question there. Briefly, please, and also please introduce yourself.
Thanks for a great presentation. My name is Ulf Kruse. I run a think tank, non-political, here in Sweden. The 5-year plan looks pretty much what MITI, the Japanese society, did after the war, Second World War, where they said we should concentrate in certain sectors, and they were very successful. And then they ran into problems. But my question is, where would you position Japan and surrounding countries like India in this graph here? Do you see them as players or tag along, or where are they?
And can we take this other question too? Hans, yeah.
Yeah, Hans Stroberg, Atlas Copco. I have a question. When a country runs such a surplus in export, the currency should appreciate. How are they able to peg the currency in this way, and why do we accept that?
Can I start with this one?
Yes.
We shouldn't accept it. I mean, our chancellor, when he went to China recently, that was one of his top 3 points that he discusses with them, but it's nothing that they're willing to adjust because of international pressure. It's almost a totem for them, the Plaza Accord of the 80s with Japan, so that connects the two questions. This will never happen to China. They will not do any adjustment to the currency policy or foreign exchange rate because of international pressure. So that's one of the basic premises. This is what they are actually working towards to prevent such a scenario to happen. Now, it may be better for them, frankly, but it's a hard internal discussion around it. Currently, they think they need it. And regarding Japan and where I would position it, I mean, clearly, China is a leader in terms of thinking around economic security and has been for more than a decade. And we're waking up to the reality that you can organize your industrial relationship with a powerful neighbor or distant neighbor in ways that are actually more strategic. Japanese are very modest when they talk about it. They think they haven't sorted this out at all, so they're problem aware more than we are. But they have systems in place to monitor the supply chain dependencies at a scale that we have no clue. I've asked someone high up in the Chancellery 3 years ago when this topic came up, and we suddenly organized a government consultation with the Japanese to learn from them about economic security. And then the discussion was, well, how do we do it? And his colleague responded, well, we can't. But we don't do economic security. That's not in our nature. We don't think about these domains as being entangled, because foreign economic policy is being done by corporates, effectively. But again, my assessment would be this is not a sustainable state of affairs if you think about long-term competitiveness and also resilience of our economies moving forward.
I'll take that. Yeah, please. You find it?
Okay, I take this one. Yeah, Jonas Mann from Atlas Copco. Are you familiar with this recent French report, Chinese steamroller? It paints the same picture as you're painting in your presentation, but their conclusions were surprising me a little bit around, reasoning around the devaluation of the euro versus the RMB or imposing new trade tariffs. What is your take on their conclusion?
Well, first of all, I don't think that a typical German would come to the same conclusion as a French on trade policy. But I think we have to listen very carefully. I mean, just to recap what they're saying, I'm summarizing this in very short ways. If we have a 30-40% basically unfair price competition due to currency valuation, but also producer price deflation, we have to have a 30-40% tariff on everything that comes from China, which, of course, consumers would pay for first and foremost. Now, it's not just the French, it's also the United States that for a decade are now discussing how exactly are we going to deal with this problem. So if two of our closest partners from a European Union perspective are thinking about radical measures to change economic relations with China, I think it's at least worth to consider that there might be a problem. And if our solution currently in Germany is largely to say, let's get rid of the bureaucracy, let's run faster, let's be better, I don't think that's sufficient. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. It will be 30% of the solution, but the rest of it, given the scale and the speed of what China is doing in this space, it's a fundamentally different challenge here. So let's take seriously when others have, I think, considered this problem as a deep one. I wouldn't come to the same conclusion. I don't think we should have a 30% tariff on China, but something that is a bit more targeted will probably be required.
And I think the map you show is also very interesting because it shows that, you know, it's hitting very geographically very differently. So maybe you also have to think about more granular approaches. Please.
Yes, my name is Richard C. I'm from the think tank, Sintrel. I have a principal question to you. First, I would like to thank you for a very, very nice presentation at all levels. So my question is that currently, I would say that the products from China, EU, and the United States are of the same quality, or Japan. But the Chinese people can produce the products half price. I generalize, okay? So, but this is because their salary is half price. So you have not taken up this matter. Is it so that Europe, if you say that we accept to have a wage half price, we will have the same product as Chinese for the same price, so there will be no problem?
And maybe I thank you for the question. Before I let you answer, it's interesting because I was at a dinner with a bunch of some of the more successful startup entrepreneurs in Sweden, and we have quite a lot of them, thankfully. But one of the tones there was sort of like, is it just that we are not willing to work as hard as many of the Chinese workers have now or employees have now for 20 years? I don't know, but if you want to react to that.
I mean, I'm going to give a response that you would also get from a Chinese diplomat, and actually we got it recently. Well, all of this is the hard work of Chinese people. Yeah. And I think there's an element of truth in that we seriously have to take into account. It's super hard work, it's long work hours, it's very little holidays, it's a financial repressed system. So your spending is not invested in something that is internationally attractive, but at home, because you can't. So there's many factors that play a critical role where we simply have to accept this as hard work. So praise them and move on. But there's other input factors that I think we cannot just exclude from that calculus. It's the price of land, it's the subsidy story, it's the central steering. So I think it's a mixed picture, but I agree with you, hard work, they deserve it and should own and have a better future. Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, I leave it at that.
Yeah. so much more that could be said. And I also wanted to get to, but I think we have to wrap it up here. I hope we can get in the panel into maybe some of your reflections from your recent visit also, and the meetings you had with the Chancellor in Beijing. It would be really interesting to hear.
I'm not doing this.
Somebody else doing.
Yeah.
But just to wrap up, I think, and this question, I also get this question quite often about, we've been there before, like we've seen, industrial policy from Japan. I think what your presentation has shown very clearly is that just as the superpower rivalry between China and the US is fundamentally different from the superpower rivalry between China and the US and the Soviet Union, I think what we're dealing with in China compared to countries like Japan, which also have had very successful industrial policy, is really a matter of scale. Yep. Which makes it completely non-comparable in my mind, right? So I think that's something we need to, that's something I have in my mind a lot, but we can come back to that. So with that, I want to thank you so much, Mikko. I think you set a really excellent scene. You will come back in the panel, and I'll give you, thank you for setting the scene.
Thank you.
For the second part, and I think that's why this is such an excellent seminar, we're actually going to turn now to some of these Swedish companies that have been world leaders, not just in their industries, but actually, I would say, what I find very impressive, world leaders in their ability to renew themselves continuously over almost a century, some of these, right? So like actually being able to constantly reinvent themselves, adapt to a changing technological and world environment, and come out on top. So I'm really very much looking forward to three sort of testimonials from companies that I think you showed also quite nicely, Mikko. Different companies are pursuing slightly different strategies with and in China, and I'm hoping we're going to get a flavor of that with these three presentations. So my idea is we'll do them sequentially, and then I'll maybe ask a few questions after each of the presentations, if that's okay. So starting is Rutger de Vries, Senior Advisor, former President of Industrial Operations Asia at Scania. And before you come up, Rutger, I also want to say the thing that the three of you have in common, which makes it very valuable, is that I don't know how many years together you've spent in China, but it's a significant amount of time that the three of you have spent on the ground in China, witnessing what is happening really close up, right, in your respective fields. So I think that makes this extremely valuable. So with that, Rutger, if you would like to kick us off, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Thank you for having me today and giving the possibility to share my experiences. Very few data, a lot of feelings, my personal feelings of working in China. Scania has established its third industrial hub in China lately, and I've been responsible for that project, and the aim of that project was to establish units able to produce 50,000 trucks and to develop a truck specifically designed for the Chinese market. And to put you into the picture before I go into my reflections, I want you to give a flavor of what we have been doing. This is how the site in Rugao, that's a city, a very small Chinese city, 1.5 hour by train northwest of Shanghai, looked in 2023. July 2023, we drilled down the first pole, and today, since then, we have been doing this. All this done in 2 years' time. And during the same period of 2 years, we also developed a complete vehicle. Thank you. Mikko, you said with China, without China, or against China. And we have chosen to team up with China. I've been responsible for this activity the past 4 years. And 4 years ago, when I moved to China, I've been living in Rugao for 3.5 years, I was afraid of moving there. I was afraid because I'm reading the same newspapers as you are reading, and we are pumped with articles and news that has a negative connotation about China. China is something that we should be afraid of and that we should keep a distance to. So China wasn't something that I was really interested in fact, going to. I was expecting a hostile environment, an environment where it would be difficult to work with and that I should be cautious working with Chinese people. And today I know that most of the things, almost all of the things I thought I knew about China were bollocks. That was wrong. Chinese people are, and I'm talking about the people in my feelings, Chinese people are really, really friendly. They are really, really interested in cooperating with us. They are really, really helpful. I arrived in China at the end of the COVID period, and then you had to show a QR code that you had been tested a couple of days before, and that is hidden in your WeChat. And every time I was searching for that in my telephone, someone came forward, can I help you? And then they helped me to find the QR codes, and that happens all the time, everywhere where you are in China. They're really, really friendly. I had been in China often. I still had a feeling that China was a developing country. I don't know why, but I had a feeling that China was a developing country. It's an extremely modern country. They are ahead of us in a lot of areas. You have shown that before. Electrification has come much faster, and if you have access to Alipay or WeChat, you can get whatever you want on your doorstep within a couple of hours. It's an extremely modern country. It's a beautiful country. If you're looking for a tourist attraction or a beautiful scenery to go to, look for something in China. I've been traveling around a lot. It's beautiful. But more importantly, if you know how to do it, and I've made my mistakes, we have made our mistakes, but if you know how to do it, it's not difficult to do business in China. I don't experience it difficult. It's easy to do business in China. I also went there with the idea that the supplier quality was an issue, that suppliers in China might have difficulties to meet up to our standards and our quality norms. We put the highest demands on our parts that are used in industry, and I thought that we would have difficulties to find that in China. That's not true. There's, of course, a whole continuum of bad suppliers in China as well, but there are numerous suppliers that we do business with that are extremely good and living up to the level of quality of Swedish or German suppliers, and often outperforming these. They do that at much lower costs, and they do that at much higher speed. And that's something that I get a lot of questions about, and that's often asked, what should we change in order to increase our speed to China speed? Here, in Europe, it's often when you ask for a prototype that comes in a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months, that comes over the weekend when you work with a Chinese supplier. And I would like to dive a little bit deeper into why I think, and this is I've only spent 4 years in China, so these are my personal observations and nothing else than my personal observations. There is no silver bullet that we can copy. As with lean manufacturing, when that came from Japan, there is nothing that we can copy, but we can learn a lot from China. But in order to be able to learn, you have to understand where that comes from, Chinese speed. And one of the big things is a cultural difference. All of the parents of my Chinese colleagues have lived through starvation. They remember that there were people dying because there was no food on the table. And that paints another color on how you look upon work. My grandfather said to me, Rutger, he lived through the Second World War in a similar situation. He said to me, Rutger, you have to be able to take care of a family. And for me, that's 2 generations away. For my Swedish colleagues, that's so far away you cannot remember it. For Chinese people, that's their parents telling them, make sure that you can take care of a family. And that paints your view on work. Then there is, and Miko, you addressed that a lot, then there is the Chinese government. There's a big difference between Chinese way of governing and the European way of governing, or the Western way of governing. One striking factor is that most ministers, also the president of China, is an engineer. They have an engineering background. And I don't say that because we're here today, but that puts a different view on structures and structured way of working. Makes it complicated when you get a COVID crisis, because it becomes very, very technical and difficult to get out. But when you talk about industry policies, it's good to have a lot of engineers around you. So they put in place very, very structured ways of, as Miko showed, deploying strategies. And they do not have to focus on being re-elected every 4 years, so they have the possibility to put in place a really long-term strategy. Xi Jinping said in 1992, the Arabs have oil, 1992. The Arabs have oil, we have rare earth metals. And they put an industry on the feet around that in order to make sure that they would be able to control that business, and today they do. So a very, very structured way of putting strategies into place. We are surprised by the electrification and think that has come as a surprise from China. As Miko showed, there was a strategy in 2015. If we would have read the 5-year plan in 2015 cautiously and would have taken that seriously, we would have understood that they are today leading in batteries, solar panels, windmills and electric vehicles, because they wrote that down in their targets and they have put the money where their priorities are. Then my Chinese colleagues also are very used to competition. They compete from very small ages. When they go into a secondary class, you have to be the best in the class in order to get to the secondary school where you want to go, or to get to the university where you want to go. So they stop doing football or playing music at a young age and start working. They work like hell. 10, 12 hours a day, and I'm talking about kids going to school. 10, 12 hours a day, and then the homework starts. And in the weekend, they often have extra lessons. So they are very used to a competitive environment. And the strategies that the Chinese government puts in place, they define their priorities, as Mika just showed. They have done it again for the coming 5 years. And then they put the money where their priorities is and help a lot of companies on their feet. Every province in China has its own battery electric vehicle, OEM, and they are competing with each other. Razor-sharp competition in China. So competition is something that they are very, very used to, and that helps you get up to speed. At the same time, Chinese people do not think about me, the first thing they think about. They have a stronger notion than we have that they're part of a bigger whole. That the family, development of the family, development of the society where you live in, the company, that you are a part of that. And if that becomes better, if your company is doing good, if society is doing good, then I'm doing good as well. And that makes a difference as well. Then there is governance. And that is something that we in Swedish industry have to reflect on a lot. In Chinese companies, it's extremely clear who takes the decision. There is discussion, they weigh all the arguments, but then there's one person that takes the decision, and then you go. In Europe, we tend to do lots of discussions, and at least at Scania, decisions are often taken 3 times. First in some kind of steering committee, then in another steering committee, and then at the board. That doesn't happen in a Chinese company. On top of that, they dare to take decisions on 70% of facts. So if they have a good enough idea on that's the direction, let's go. We would put another commission at work in order to find out whether that's the right direction, and that takes time. Where Chinese companies are different from us as well is automation. I've met a lot of Chinese companies where the principle is what's possible to automate should be automated. We would do a business case. That is not the thing I have seen at my Chinese competitors and suppliers and partners. There is a principle. If you can automate, you should automate, because in the end it will be more efficient. And something that we cannot look away from is that Chinese, and that has a lot to do with the 4 points I was discussing earlier, work harder than we do. We work 225 days in average per year. Chinese people work 250 days per year. Their days are longer, and it's strange if you do not work overtime. And that's completely different in our case. Then going forward, should we give up or choose for a strategy against China? We have chosen for a strategy to try to team up with partners in China. We have been standing like this to China for a very long time. We have been telling each other that we should be afraid of China. We think that that's the wrong strategy. Future is defined in China. We have to be part of that. We have to learn from it. We have to adopt our way of working to what we learn in China and team up with that strategy. We have to simplify our governance. It takes too long time. We have to be able to take decisions faster than we do today. And we should create possibilities. And we have a lot of legacy that makes it difficult, but we should have the same kind of principle, at least at Scania, that we should automate what can be automated. And that's my last remark, and that's a personal one. When COVID happened, then we started working from home. A lot of Chinese companies were also locked in. Colleagues were locked in, but at work, in order to be able to do the work. And working from home behind your computer is not the same thing as working shoulder to shoulder and solving problems together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rutger. Thanks a lot, Rutger. We don't have a lot of time. I want to ask you maybe one short question. Do you have any reflections or reactions to anything else that Mikko said? Is there something else you would like to comment on?
When I listen to you, Mikko, it creates a feeling that we should be afraid. Fear is very, very bad in such a situation. We should be curious, really, really curious, and try. And maybe I listened the wrong way to you, but we should be curious, and we should try to learn as fast and as much as possible. Otherwise, we will not be there.
Thanks a lot, Rutger. And also, I think it's interesting, you spoke a lot about speed. I think we'll come back to speed. You spoke about culture. I can say that the Chinese that I know, my age, they're actually complaining about their children that they do not have this culture anymore.
It's changing fast there
exactly.
as well.
So that's something. And I do think automation, which Mikko showed and which you talked about, which we haven't even touched upon, of course, has partially to do with the demographic cliff that they're about to approach, right? Which might be something where we can learn, or we should learn, because we are also in demographic trouble, though not nearly as bad as China. So thank you so much, Rutger. We'll move on to Anders Bell, Chief Engineering and Technology Officer at Volvo Cars. Please, go.
All right, thanks both of you. This is gonna overlap so much. And I really enjoyed, because Mikko, you basically stole all my thunder. But the thing, I'm a one-person think tank, so I had AI to do my slides, So this is good. They're really ugly, so sorry for that. Aesthetics is not the AI's strong suit yet, but also I can blame the AI if you find anything which is wrong. So that's great. So we talked a bit about electric cars, and we do electric cars for a living. So this is interesting because we've been on that 5-year plan for a long time. But I'm going to start like this is very like could have been in your deck, Mikko. I just this is AI again. No, I take no responsibility. So what's the Western brand? Why are we here at all today? Western brand market share in China across automotive, apparel, appliances, consumer goods, and industrial equipment. All curves look the same. That is the one side of the coin. This is the growth of the industrial might of China, powerful machine, all the things that we talked about. Clear. This is one side of the coin. I'm going to go more about from this side of the coin, because this is already like done deal and all that. Now this is the other side of the coin. This is the corresponding graph, corresponding data. Chinese companies' market share in Europe. So of course they are interconnected. They're growing. It's part of the whole communicating vessels of overcapacity in China or industrial might in China. Of course that's going to spill over on export markets. So this is the reason why we're here today. And here's the famous AI aesthetics. Sorry about this. This is the 5-year plans. We talked about the 5-year plans. And I was in China 2010 to 11 to 14. I said it back then when I was there as a young, and now usually I was a young and promising engineer at the time. Now I'm only promising. And you can see this happening, the slow motion, not train wreck, but the slow motion, the growth of the might, and it was, it's written down. Why are we so surprised? It's all written down on paper. The only thing which is surprising is the Western world's or our inability to see the pattern, because we're so busy in getting re-elected or doing quarterly reports. So we just fail to see. We don't have a there's no good collective long-term memory in the Western corporate and political culture. I'm going to reuse that one. That came out well. So it's all here. Here you see the results. Early days, established industrial foundation, market opening, consumer boom, etc., etc. Very early adopting technology and see where is this thing going long term? Where is the world heading? If we're going to be dominant on our autos, we should skip the combustion engine and go directly on the next thing, which is new energy vehicles. So that's where we invest. So when the world transitions, we will be there ready with a solution. And then the next, the 15th FIP now, which is about global brand leadership. Take over the world, solid-state battery, advanced autonomous driving, sustainable global supply chains, and vehicle-to-grid integration. All the things, check. That is kind of consuming a lot of the remaining Western automotive engineering outfits today. To the point of if you're on the list, you're in trouble. This is another, this was also covered, Mikko, in your excellent presentation to some extent. This one is a bit more kind of concrete, which is another factor to watch out for, the complete and utter technology separation from silicon architecture to AI, foundational AI models and hyperscalers, all the way. Everything in between is getting separated between East and West, and it's driven from both directions, of course. From the West and the US primarily on national security, self-sufficiency, etc. China very much on self-sufficiency. Also, obviously, when you go to China, the app ecosystem, all that was always different. What's interesting now is like RISC-V silicon architecture being a national project, because it's an open source, independent. You don't want to be dependent on ARM and pay licenses to some UK company or pay license to Intel for x86 silicon architecture. You go with RISC-V, which actually Europe is doing as well. A lot of investment into RISC-V in Europe, which is an open source, US free, which is part of this dynamics between Europe. Where do we go? Do we go with and the RISC-V is a good example, something neutral in the middle. That's where Europe is going. But you see the whole fracture in the middle. Chip design companies, chip design silicon fabs, you have the hardware manufacturers, the software and OS, all the government state-owned companies switching, deleting Windows basically and installing Harmony OS on all laptops. So it's step by step, and of course, as mentioned as well, hyperscalers and cloud solutions and foundational AI models, all completely separate. So this we need to design for, because this is already mostly happened, and if it hasn't happened yet, it will soon. So this is another area design. And then we touched on this. This is where we'll try to connect it a bit. This is, again, AI, sorry for the aesthetics. I often get this, I tend to get stuck in this question, is the model stupid? Why are they faster, they're better? There was a DEI article just December, I think, some podcast where it says, oh, it takes 5 years to make a car in Sweden, it only takes 2 years in China. Like, no, it doesn't. It takes 2.5 years to make a car in Sweden, unless you meant Koenigsegg, which is the other Swedish car maker. I don't know how long it takes for Koenigsegg to make a car. I know for us it takes 2.5 years. And in China, all the data I have says in China it takes 2.2 years. So we take 2.5, they took 2.2, and the difference in between is work hours. 2 times Swedish 4 weeks holidays and a long winter shutdown compared to Chinese New Year only. And then we don't do 996. But I think we can't talk about this here without understanding this. It's impossible. A lot of these Chinese super impressive, very competitive companies grown up in this culture would never exist in this environment because you can't. On the short-term financial, private equity, funded, low-risk environment that we have here, there is no, what we talked about before, patient capital. There is no patient capital in the Western system. So there is impatient capital, and there's like immediate payoffs in the quarterly report. There is no long-term plan. So I think for me, this is a source of a lot of frustrations when we talk about you need to be faster and better and stronger. Well, we're kind of, don't disturb us with policy discussion. We're kind of busy winning here. But you need to look at the entire context. You can't take something out of its context. We worked with a lot of Chinese suppliers building facilities and equipment who are really good in China, and we bring them to Europe to do installations in a factory, and they're completely lost. They can't. They have their phone book. They have nobody to call anymore. So you can't. Just as you can't bring something out of its context, put it in a completely different world, and think it will work. It's not that they're bad. They're really good in China, but what they do doesn't translate to European context necessarily. So we are doing a lot here. We have done a lot. This is why it now takes 2.5 years to do a car, which is why we are approaching this as a technology stack, which we are designing clearly for East and West, so we can adapt to both worlds to create that unique customer experience that you want in the Western digital environment. But that's not the same as the one you want to have in China. So we need to kind of find that equilibrium. And I'm going to go quick here now. So how do you win the European? This is 1987. Who recognizes this crew? Yay, there's somebody in back. How do you win the Champions League when you're IFK Göteborg? Which has actually happened, not only once, but twice. Okay, it was the UEFA Cup, but you get it. I mean, of course, don't try to beat FC Barcelona by playing like FC Barcelona. Everybody who watches football knows that. What was the Norwegian team now? Bodø Glimt? Like freaking impressive. They got that far by playing like Bodø Glimt. That's how they win. They cannot, and then also bringing like Southern European teams to the north of the Arctic Circle was part of it. Like, they need to win in their environment. So here's some kind of tips for me, because again, there's no recipe. I think you're exactly right. Everybody needs to find their way, how to compete and live. Like, how do you survive now? Now you have like the final boss battle of all like the opponents in competition. Like impressive competition coming out of China. So you need to adapt, but you can't copy. You need to play the Swedish labor law, the talent pool you have. You need to play a freaking discipline like 4-4-2, 4-5-1, I don't know. You need to have your position. You need to run like crazy, because don't go in dribbling. That's not your game. You're going to have like 4 like 2-meter tall back defenders in the back. You're going to have a huge goalkeeper, whose name is Håkan, probably. And you're going to do kind of learn and be inspired, because there's a lot to learn and be inspired from. You need to move at the speed of technology. You need to be digital first. you need to be all in. I think this is a part of it. If you look at the system level, it's an example of strength of alignment. What you can do when I'm going to almost curse here, when every MF aligns in the same direction. I think that's the biggest lesson I hold from China. You need to always challenge the status quo. We used to do this is how we like. That needs to go, because you need to reinvent yourself all the time. You need to really find efficient collaboration with your supply system. The supply ecosystem, they're really good at that in China, on collaboration. Then you need to adjust for some of the rules that you can't change. You need to treat, which several of my competitors in China don't have to. But here we need to treat CapEx and engineering of finite resources. There is only so much of it. If we are building a factory, which we do now in Slovakia, we have to pay billions of cash out of the company. None of our Chinese competitors need to do that. It's an unknown concept, CapEx almost. And then you find that, so then you need to invest with precision, find your North Star, and go for it. And the 70% rule, I think, Rutger applies. You need to continuously up your game, be relentless, and then you need to find in the different models shown by Mikko, what is our equilibrium? Which one do we apply? I don't want to give advice on this. I don't give financial advice, so nobody sue me, please. But you need to find your equilibrium. Where does this kind of balance out, and where does it balance out for us? And then the last piece, I think, some firm tips on what's the strength that we have here in Sweden and in Europe that you need to build around. These are the things we're going to build our success on. Nurse your brand and the promise it stands for. The one thing we have is really strong legacy brands, and they have meaning. They actually have meaning. Volvo cars, safety, sustainability, human-centric approach to technology, all wrapped in beautiful Scandinavian design. Perfect. Let's build around that. That we can never surrender or negotiate. And we need to systemize and build the machine that creates the machine. We are competing against the machine. We need to build our own machines of super efficiency. We need to seek simplicity because of our context and how we work. How do you create resilience, long-term success? How do you cover the maximum addressable market with your smallest possible complexity? And again, this is a duplication, but I know, but it's important. Strengthen collaboration, integration, and synergies within your ecosystem. All right, that's it for me.
Thanks a lot, Anders. And I'm sorry, I forgot with Rutger. Is there anybody who has a question to Anders or a comment? Is there any? I think it was a great presentation. I have one, so I'm going to ask you the same one at the end also if there's something you want to comment from Mikko's, besides from what you commented. But before we get to that, you talk about I think this slide is really interesting, the strength of alignment and challenging the status quo. Are you speaking from a company perspective? Or are you speaking
in every fiber, like Sweden, I mean, everything, all the time, everywhere.
Okay, and is this happening not from a company perspective?
Well, we do it every day. I mean, this is how we get as far as we come. But I think, I'm like, if you look on the policy side, if you remember the picture, like, that's too slow. It's not going to change my life in any meaningful way. Like literally, I'm 51. But seriously, even on an operational basis for a company like we are moving so fast now, like changing like IAA, like it's interesting. I read it. It's gonna come in effect when 2 years from now. Like it's like we can't plan for this. No. It doesn't really do. So I think I'm kind of out there in the frontline trenches of hyper competition and geopolitics every single day. Like we're busy kind of surviving and winning. So it's like, I don't expect much from the policy system. I don't expect much. We have the financial system we have the democracies we have the regulatory process we have. I don't think we can put any big expectation on that. We need to put our game face on every morning we go to work.
And that's the company speaking.
That's the company speaking. We just need to kick it out of the park.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Otherwise, is there something you would like to comment from Mikko's perspective?
No, this was great. I mean, both, and I think I connected both of it. I didn't put so much personal reflection. I share yours from my time in China for sure, and you still stole my thunder.
Thanks a lot, Anders.
Thanks.
No, excellent. Thank you so much. All right. right, last but not least, Fabien Dumont, Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of Autoliv. Thanks a lot for coming, Fabien. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very, very much. So my name is Fabien. I'm the Group CTO for Autoliv. I've been working for this amazing company for 28 years, so I started to work very, very young, obviously. I'm from France, as you can hear. And my background before to move to engineering is, or was, very much into quality and operations. So, and that's the reason why I moved to China 21 years ago now. It was to set up key operation, what we call inflators in our world. In China, then I took over after most of the operation in China, so I've set up totally 5 campuses in China. Then I moved to engineering in 2018 and became eventually the group CTO about a bit less than 2 years ago. And of course, you know, from a local responsibility in China, when I became the group CTO, one of the first discussion and question I had with my boss, the group CTO was, the CEO, sorry, was where should I be located? And very obviously the answer was, you stay in China, Fabien. And why stay in China? Because China is today the most fastest innovative ecosystem that we have in automotive. Very quickly, sorry, oops, I have to come back. I didn't want to do that, but hopla. I wanted to share also a few words about Autoliv. Might not be known as much as Scania or Volvo is. So we are the global leader in our domain. So we do safety system product. We do develop and manufacture airbags, seatbelt, and steering wheels. We are 73 years old. We were founded in Vårgårda, next to Gothenburg, next to Volvo as well. And we have the most amazing mission as a company, which is to saving more lives. We are 65,000 people all around the world, located in 25 countries plus. We save 40,000 lives every year, and we avoid as many as 600,000 severe injuries as well. And to all of this, we have 5,500 engineers located in 30 tech centers across the globe that are passionate to saving more lives. A few words about Autoliv in China. So we are 37 years old in China. We started by a joint venture in Nanjing in 89. We're also the strongest player. So Autoliv has a quite high market share overall globally, very well distributed in I would say, the 4 main geographical regions, and China is one of those. So China is now 19% of our sales turnover as a company, so close to 20. And we are, our market share is about 32% in China. And that despite a very, very fierce competition. So we have, of course, the big players, but as we talk about, almost every also province in China will have his own safety system maker. We supply about everybody. The market is very scattered in China. There is many UMs, close to 100. We deliver 100 of those. And we increasingly see China not only as a market, so China is about 33 million cars, okay, which is more than a third of total market. But we see now China as becoming a global catalyst for speed and innovation for our company. And the market has very much changed. So automotive has started about mid-80s in China. And until 2010, you could see that the market has basically followed the traditional OEMs, so the GMs and the Volkswagen and the PSAs when they came first. But as soon as early 2010, my company has started to see a shift in China, such as they become different enough, okay, specific enough, that we started to create what the famous China for China concept. So much work on speed and on specific innovation, given how hungry was China already at that time when it was coming to new product. Then after COVID, obviously, a big change happened is China has grown very much during those 3 years while we were basically close to the world. And China has become now a center of excellence, starting to transfer most of its best practices to the entire world. And now we are starting to call it the China for Global Focus. So my last 3-4 years when working in the region, I spent quite a fair amount of my time to start to transfer all the best practices that we have done in engineering to the globe. So lead time, of course, focus on speed, curiosity for new innovation, amazing ecosystem, as being said by my peers here, makes now China a global hub for Autoliv. So why China has been excelling, and it's a bit of your personal reflection and what has been said also before by Mikko or Anders, but the level of competition in China is just amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And it gives you a sense of urgency that will drive us to drive speed and cost if you want to remain alive. And I always say that this competition has been keeping me and my teams always awake and on our toes 7 days a week, 365 days a year, given how fierce is the competition. And the mindset is very simple. It's if the environment can change, then we adapt directly. And with this principle, we have become a global benchmark when it comes to teamwork within the company. China also has a very high level of customer focus. I found out now working, traveling very much all over the places with my new job, that we all talk about how customer is important, but many of us don't walk the talk. China walk the talk. So we aim to exceed and not just to meet the customer expectation. China also accepts very early stage. I think you mentioned it. Very hungry for innovation, an appetite for new innovation and new toys overall, and that tolerance enables very rapid iteration, innovation, and problem solving. Given the fact that because they accept product that might not be completed at 200%, then if an issue is found, they have to fix it very quickly. And this problem-solving method has given a very high speed of iteration for innovation. We spoke about this many times. The government has also a huge stake. Mikko mentioned the long-term plan. We mentioned several times the 5-year plan. So they have a clear long-term roadmap for technology and industry, structured funding programs, not only for Chinese company, but for any company in China. Any company, from my point of view, has the same right when it comes to funding from the government. And I think that the company in China that got the biggest subsidies, I think, is not from China, and I'm pretty much sure about that number. Early adoption also, such as connectivity or Gen AI, has been providing also extreme benefit to speech and the China ecosystem overall. 2 examples that I can share with you. The first one I think we touched upon about this is the electrification. When we started to talk about electrification in the traditional market, or for the traditional OEM, I would say, it was just to electrify powertrain. China has not only electrified powertrain, they have mixed that with connectivity and technology at an amazing competitive price. Okay, and that's why today you see the benefit in China. So China is now, the Chinese OEM are over 90% of market share when it comes to electrical and hybrid cars in China. And this market is now as big as 50%. So we talk about 16, 17 million cars that are being Chinese on this specific market, given this great value proposition that they put together. The second one is AI. So we said, and we mentioned several times, that China is very hungry, is not shy to apply new technology, higher appetite than anybody else for experimentation. And I've seen many companies internalizing this capability. Okay, and if I take as example my company, so Autoliv in China, we started our journey back in 2020 for digitalization, and we have now over 1,000 engineers that can by themselves. Okay, so you don't need to call external people, you don't need to call IT people. They are 100% autonomous, so they've been trained and developed to develop digital tools and AI complex tools, which makes us in a unique position that we can permanently, so every year at any time of the year, we have more than 600 digital projects. 600 digital projects at any time of the year. So you can imagine the speed of the project and the benefit that you can get over those projects. So once more, internalizing and putting that in a clear roadmap that this know-how has to be done by the employee and not being done and not being outsourced was essential for us here. So what are the industrial and innovation dynamics in China? You touched upon few lead time. This illustration here on the wall is showing actual example that we have been through in China. So this represents 2 lead times. The top one is the one from the Chinese OEM, the bottom one from, let's call it the traditional OEM, and that's the launch time. And the launch time is not driven by us, it's driven by the customer. So the customer has milestone 1, 2, 3, 4, and so those milestones are only driven by the customer. Average lead time today from traditional car makers is about 22 months, when the same number for China today, it's about 12 months. So that's a request from the customer, okay? And most likely due to those benefits when it comes to lead time, we see now also a clear reduction when it comes to product life cycle. In China today, I know a Chinese OEM will refresh or even replace their car model about every 3 years, okay? When we still see today traditional OEMs having between 5 to 7 years in between. So this forces a global organization to rethink timing, speed, of course, and decision-making process. Development efficiency, obviously, and how quickly they should be performing either refresh or replace their car completely. Such changes would have not been possible without the impressive ecosystem, mentioned also by several times here. The quality of the supply chain in China is amazing, and it starts from the end user down to, I don't know, minus 10, 15 level innovation. They all think the same way. And that's a clear difference that is absolutely unique in the world. If tomorrow anybody comes back to Europe, you don't have the proper ecosystem because you will need 6 months to get a tooling. And if you need to change your tooling, you will have to wait 3 more months to get to a tooling. In China, all the value chain works at the same speed. So the iteration is much, much faster. And this has created both a lot of accountability and strong collaboration overall. Companies are also very good at deciding make versus buy, to outsource or to partners. So the decision is very simple. If there is someone better than them in anything they do, they partner. They partner. They don't try to do something that they are not good at. They work with the best people in their different field. Of course, once more the government, and the government has been pushing very much for technology, and chips, AI has been part of it, so that's helped very much the China know-how overall to evolve very positively, and of course improve very, very much the resilience of the ecosystem overall. Finally, ecosystem keeps moving. JV used to be mandatory in China, so no OEM could come to China without doing a joint venture with a Chinese OEM. It has changed, okay? But now what is very interesting is that we see a lot of Western OEM trying to partner with technology Chinese companies. So Xpeng and Volkswagen, for instance, we spoke about this at lunchtime. Horizon Robotics with Volkswagen once more. Leap Motor with Stellantis as another example. So you can see now very different partnership coming from this ecosystem. So how companies should navigate China? First, the ecosystem. We talk about this many times. And partnership are very much essential. So a key lesson that we don't understand, I think I like very much when you mentioned, Anders, it's the partnership is very essential to the success. And very simple guiding principle, if you found anyone better than you, then you collaborate with those guys. And it's quite long usually in traditional company to take all those decisions. In China is much, much easier. Okay, in the same way, they don't have capex. The process in M&A is also much, much faster than it could be in the Western world. There is no prestige when it comes to partnership. The only target is to be better. And there is no barrier also when it comes to external collaborations as soon as we improve the bottom line. Finally, fostering a competitive mindset internally and externally. I think that has been mentioned very, very well. So that you are always looking at overperforming. Speed and empowerment, obviously, and steps here are very important if we want to make it systemic. We need to touch the organization. We need to touch the way we decide and we do things. So adapting organizational structures to support faster execution, enabling shorter and cross-functional decision cycles, and reducing any friction such as you don't have any waste of time between handover steps. At the same time, in China, there is a very strong can-do attitude that we don't see everywhere. And this is through empowering teams at all levels to make the decisions. We used to say that China is very much top-down. This has changed. Okay, now you have a ton of decisions that is being made at the working level, such as we can save a lot of time and have the management to focus on the proper topic. And also you continue to work on removing unnecessary approval layers that slow down any decision-making process. Of course, continue to develop digital and capability and innovation. So invest heavily in AI, data governance, and citizen developers. Accelerate speed of innovation, and always learn from the market given the very fierce competition. And finally, accelerate, of course, the innovation engine. To summarize, so the key lessons from China are not about individual technology that they might be able to do today. It's about how organizations operate together. China demonstrates that when you ally together speed, focus, and effectiveness into one system, no spread over, into one system, then you can beat the unbeatable. Shorter decision cycles, clear prioritization, and a strong partnership mindset makes idea to move from concept to realization much, much faster. You don't have silos in China, or you have much less silos in China that we can see here. You have one big country, you have one strong government. We are talking about Europe, and that's what I like very much in the present from Miko. In Europe, to change a law, you need 27 people to agree. You don't have this problem in China. And that's something that we need to learn, how to improve once more our structure and our path to quicker decision to be successful. So the real advantage doesn't lie on just copying China, okay, due to its uniqueness, but in integrating the best practices in global ways of working, building organizations that move fast, adapt better, and compete more efficiently in a rapidly changing global market. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fabien. Again, are there any questions or comments to Fabien? Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Alice Nyman from Getinge. Thank you for a great presentation. Can you see me?
I can see you now.
I was wondering, what value do you think that Swedish and European companies can offer the Chinese? To me, from hearing all these presentations, it's clear that we cannot compete on price or speed. We can always improve, but we can't win. So what specifically do you think that Swedish companies can do to differentiate and win in China?
I don't know enough about Swedish company, even if I've been working for Autoliv for some time. I will talk about Western company if it's fine. So today, when you merge the strength of the Chinese culture, okay, and we talk about hardworking people, we talk about people that are very hungry to learn, and so forth, with the strength of what we have done previously. So today, we still have our way of working today is still amazing. So Anders was talking about being able to do a car in 2.5 years, when China, with all those advantages, are doing 2.2 months. If you move those Swedish people into China, they might be able to do it in 18 months, if it makes sense. So today, I believe very much in the mix of culture. And it's very challenging to make a cross-functional team working, and even more when we put together different nationalities. I just finished my EMBA a couple of years ago, and I remember a paper from our corporate finance professor telling us that there is no business case in inclusion. That was the conclusion of the paper, and of course everybody is very surprised, and we ask why. Because the chance to have a French, a Swedish, a Chinese, a Japanese, an American to agree on something is very low. But when it works, the result is much better. Yeah. It's a bit like a startup. If you put your money in Bitcoin today, or Bitcoin, if you put Bitcoin today versus a stable company, if Bitcoins take off, then you will become richer. So a bit the same principle. So I believe very, very much in a cross-cultural organization, and I see, great things in America, great things in Japan, great things in Europe that we can bring to China because they don't learn it from their culture.
Thanks a lot, Fabian. Did you have anything more you wanted to say about Mikos? Is anything with?
No, I mean that's also my biggest surprise. Of course, I've been there a very long time, so the electrification is not new at all for me. And the reason why is because I read in 2005 the 5-year plan. So actually, they talk about electrification in the 95 5-year plan, where they started to push for all this. So, but no, it's a very good presentation, and I think this micro information is very important for us to understand where China and how China is thinking, and it's a good tip for us to work better together with China.
We're going to have to end here because we're going to move into the panel. But thank you so much, Fabian. Excellent.
Thank you.
So I think we've gotten two wonderfully complementary pictures. I would now like to welcome our panel, which is going to help us merge these views and interpret them and make sense of them. So if you could join me up on stage, we have Tina Karlberg. I think your title is Managing Director, Sweco International, but also up until maybe a year ago, the technical science counselor in Beijing. So welcome, Tina. We have Fredrik Cho, Vice Chair of the Sweden-China Trade Council and quite well-known senior China advisor. Welcome, Fredrik. We also have Fredrik Sjöholm, Professor at EFN. And I don't know if it's mentioned here and what it is. I forgot, Fredrik, what it is in English.
Research Institute of Industrial Economics.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And finally, Mikko, please join us. So this is our panel, and we're also, again, opening up for questions. I think I liked the question that was asked by Yetinge very much, and also the statement, we can always improve, but we can't win. Maybe that's something we'll come back to. But I would maybe like to start with the three panelists who haven't spoken yet. If there's something you would like to pick up on in particular from what you've heard so far. I don't know if any of you who would like to start. Go ahead, Fredrik.
Thank you. No, I think extremely interesting to listen to these presentations, and I certainly learned a lot. I think a common theme here is speed.
Yeah.
You know? And that comes in two aspects. It's speed in companies and it's speed in policymaking. And I think, you know, starting with speed in companies, that's of course a challenge for Swedish firms, but it's also an opportunity. And I know from my friends in the business community, like Hans and others, that, you know, of course, Swedish firms, for instance, are looking at this and try to adapt to and learn from these Chinese firms. And if they are successful, that will, of course, you know, bring a lot of productivity gains and growth and so forth. If they are unsuccessful, they'll be wiped out. Speed in policy making was also, you know, coming up here. I think not least from Mikko. That's more problematic. Yeah. That's more problematic because, of course, one thing is that, you know, Sweden is a democracy. That, you know, by definition makes the processes slower, but maybe better. Because, as Mikko, I think, was hinting at, we're looking at this 1/3 of the Chinese economy, you know, but there's a lot of waste of resources. So it's a slower process in democracy, but maybe at the end the policy will be slightly better. It's also the case that we have to recognize that, you know, China is a country without property rights and land rights, basically, a bit exaggerated, but no property rights, no land rights. So, of course, if you want to build a railroad, you know, it's the Communist Party owns the land, you kick out the tenants. You don't want to have that kind of situation in Sweden. Having said that, I do think that we can learn or try to work with less regulation and so forth. And that's something we discuss all the time. We often blame the European Union, and it's true, there's a lot of regulations coming from there. But the truth is that in Sweden, we often add up extra regulations on what's coming from the European Union. So that's what I take home from this discussion.
A lot more that we can unpack there. Thanks a lot, Fredrik. Go ahead, the other Fredrik. It's always difficult with two Fredriks in a panel.
Fredrik, what can I add? I mean, excellent presentations from Mikko, Anders, and Fabien. I think that, as some of the previous speakers mentioned, most important, we should be inspired, not copy, but emulate, adapting it to our circumstances. I mean, it's one meme which I'm pretty sick and tired of is that the US innovates, China replicates, and EU regulates. All of the three innovates, all of the three replicate, all of the three regulate. But we have to catch up on the speed in terms of regulation, and we have to make sure to be the best. I mean, I often get the question by a lot of people, oh, how can we compete with China? Well, the answer is simple, but the implication is difficult. We have to be best. We have to be better than them. And that might take some time. But having that kind of mindset is the most important thing for us to know. Because China will not be the best. And I think that I liked Anders' analogy with sports of IFK Göteborg. And I often get the question that, I mean, because I'm very much into sports also, when the Soviet Union was totally dominant in ice hockey in the 1980s, I mean, Sweden and Czechoslovakia, Finland, when they were not competing for the gold medal, winning the silver medal was enough because they were out of competition. I mean, in 1981, when there was the game between Soviet Union and Sweden, Soviet beat Sweden by 13-1. But we still got the silver medal. So I think that aiming for the gold medal, but being very realistic with what we can achieve, and starting from our conditions, our circumstances, is something that is realistic. And being aware that China, of course, is moving in the direction of becoming a high-income country. Things are starting to cost in China. So it's not sort of that they will always be permanently, eternally cheaper. Yeah. Quality-wise, they're getting better, but I mean, so there are certain areas that we actually might be becoming more competitive in that direction.
Just one question or comment before I let in Tina. You and I have known each other for a long time, Fredrik, and for 20 years we've been talking about how the West should learn and adapt. And I think what we've seen here, and also as you were touching upon, Fredrik Sjöholm, I think what we've seen here is a testimony of the companies learning and adapting. Yes. But we don't really see our political systems learning and adapting. At least in the 20, I think we've been saying the same thing for 20 years.
Yeah, but maybe we should go back in history. I mean, many of you have read the book by Dan Wang, Breakneck, saying that China is the engineering state, the US a lawyerly society. But I mean, if we look at our own history, we used to be, and we are in certain respects still, an engineering state. we've done things. I mean, when Olof Palme had his 1st of May speech in 1965 in Karlskoga, he said that there's an enormous need for engineers in Sweden. And which country in Europe built nuclear power stations in a decade from 1960s? That was Sweden. So you don't have to be an autocratic dictatorship to get things done. You have to have a focus.
So you're optimistic.
Yeah.
Tina, you have to be.
There's so many wise things that have been said now. It's difficult to say something that is sort of brand new in this panel. But one thing first of all, I think we should, what we haven't done so far, we have been really poor at, I think, is maybe we have read the plan, but we haven't understood the actionability of China. And I think that is something that we really have to, I mean, it's late to understand it now, but we have to really embrace that when something is in the plan, it's getting done. Yeah. So I think that is one thing that we really have to understand. We can't copy that. We don't want to, and you have already said that. And there's one thing that I think also that we tend to sort of, forget when we talk about this tech race. And that is one thing that is also really deciding the fate of this planet, is the environmental debts that we are building up and the climate change that we are facing each day. I think also that is a spot where we have, in spite of all the solar panels and the wind turbines that they can make in China, we are still ahead of the game there, I think, in the Nordics, not least. In Europe, maybe, but in Sweden, I'm pretty sure in Sweden and in the Nordics. So looking at the green transition and how we do that effectively, I think that's also a space where we are actually already or still in the lead, and we should try and keeping that. And that is not always about technology, but about understanding the problem and what we need to do about it. And what I would like to add there is that this is a question that it has lost ground, because we look at the wars and the AI battle, so both sort of physical wars and tech wars, and we have forgotten about the sustainability question. I think that is really something that we need to pay more attention to.
Thanks a lot for bringing that in, Tina, because I think in our preparatory meeting we also talked about how what we see now is sustainability sort of taking a back seat or even be portrayed as something that we can't afford in Europe right now. And again, it's very interesting to look at China, which sees sustainability hugely as a security and a competitiveness angle. So I think that's something. And I also think your point about strategy, how it's taken us a long time to understand that strategy is not just a document, which it sometimes is in our democracies, as I say, somebody who's worked for the government also, but that and also that it's not just a top-down implementation of strategy, right? It's more like a mobilizing. I think that's what your presentations have shown. It mobilizes forces, not just government budgets, right? So, Mikko, would you like to add something to the company presentations or?
No, first of all, thank you. I mean, it's always a super fantastic opportunity to see what companies are achieving and doing. And it's also good to be in Sweden because there's a higher level of confidence of actually being able to compete. Let me say, this is not the case in other parts of Europe. So congratulations, but also, mind you, the world doesn't look like Stockholm everywhere. And second is, I think your point that you've all said it, this is about systemic competition, and you don't have to load this up with, how terrible and how bad and whatever. But there's elements of systemic performance that we can learn from or be thinking about. And the radical focus on education, I'm missing that clearly across Europe, and that sustaining that for decades, because we have to invest in people, and knowledge-based societies. Maybe it's the case in Sweden. It's not the case across Europe. But also this thinking in terms of larger target strategies and then performance indicators to nail it down. I mean, we don't want companies to operate the same way as a government. There's good reasons for that. There's accountability, so it may work differently. A state should not go bankrupt if possible. Companies can if they fail. But frankly, sitting in Berlin or in Brussels or other places, I feel that there is a lot that needs to be changed in terms of actually delivering on what we promise on the top level. And there's so much that can be done. I also think we and that's something to learn from the companies, it's this confidence in what actually works on our side. That's good. There's a risk of being overconfident because speed and scale can have, it's not about efficient competition on the Chinese side necessarily. Effective competition is enough. So if you push out your competitor and you make massive losses along the way, that's fine for certain companies in China. And this pattern, I mean, I've tried to establish it. It will happen to others in Europe. And that's the question where, through which targeted measures can we actually prevent that from happening too fast? And next 5-10 years, I think, will be pretty critical. At least we feel it in Germany. It's a sustained pressure on manufacturing. If you have VDMA, these are really the free trade Talibans of Germany. I was saying we want government intervention, then something fundamental has happened. And that's a political negotiation. I think it's also a negotiation to some extent with the Chinese. But it has these deep societal effects, I think, that we also need to be looking at.
Yeah. I agree. And so maybe then we can turn towards, and you feel free to react to each other, but I think one of the things that I think is interesting that Tina brought in is this how China also manages align its sustainability ambition, or quite significant sustainability ambitions are also clear with competitiveness, right? And with security, which we seem to now be questioning more and more. But what would you like to see happen? Or where do you see this going, right? I do think, I like your point, Mikko, about it. I think we are in a systemic competition, right? It's a competition also to show whether our mature democracies can handle this kind of systemic competition. Because it's not, at the end of the day, the companies are doing what they can, and this is what is Sweden's strength, that they've been doing it successfully for so long, but is that gonna be enough? I guess this is the fundamental. And if not, what else would you like to see happen? Or what would you think should happen so that these companies can compete even more efficiently or effectively? Would anybody like to, both at national level and also, of course, European level,
Sorry,
No,
ladies first.
Okay, ladies first. No, what I would like to say something, and that is that I think that, we are waking up. I think you said that also earlier, that to understand that we are not looking at the world in the same way. China, we knew that, but also US and Europe. And I think it was Mike Carney from Canada who brought this up at the summit in Davos, wasn't it? Yeah. Talking about the rupture in the system. And my fear now is that we spend the next 3 years talking about this, crisis management in our family. Our family is broken, what do we do? So I think that would be a really dangerous pit to fall into, that we are going down that rabbit hole, discussing, talking, because I think that is really a fact rather than something to debate. So the sooner we come up on some kind of a more practical level on how to manage this politically, but also among companies, of course, I think the better. But the companies are better suited to take that kind of discussion. Because we are sort of very practically oriented. We have to be. But the political side, I'm more worried about.
Thanks.
Well, I think that speed, definitely. What are we waiting for? We got the Draghi report almost 2 years ago, where we have all these kind of reports that we need to do this and this. We had the AI Commission in Sweden. Where's the Nike, just do it spirit? Get things done. One of the important things not mentioned today about the new 15th five-year plan is the unified market. Europe has been talking about it for 33 years. Where is the unified market? Let's get things done. It doesn't have to be democratic or autocratic, just get it done. That would help us all. We need scale. We have a very well-functioning capital market in Sweden and the Nordics. Why can't we apply it for the whole of Europe? Why have we 150, 200 telecom operators in Europe while there are 3 in China and 4 or 5 in the US?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that the European Union is an internal market is one of the strengths for the European countries, and we should work more on deepening the integration. Kind of interesting is that where we have most of the regulations and the problems is in the service sector. So we have been super focused on industry here now, but really the big regulations in Europe is in the service sector rather than industry, which there are still trade restrictions, but it's a marginal phenomenon. The service sector is a completely different story. There you can get extreme productivity gains. What's interesting is that, you know, services is becoming increasingly important. It's 40% of Sweden's export of services today. Some of it's linked to goods, but still it's very important. China is pretty weak in services, you know, and it's over-regulated in China, you know. So there's definitely something that we might be also globally competitive, right? So, and here I think it's also, so that's one thing, deepen the integration. And the service sector is important. It's also a bit unfortunate that Germany, because we really would like to see a grow in Germany. A grow in Germany would be more important for us than anything that happens in China. You know, it's much more important. Yes. No, it is. But they can't get their act together, right? And part of it is, you know, maybe unfortunate. They were betting on Russia for energy, on US for security, and on China for export markets, and all the thing collapsed, right? But it's also paradoxically that we kind of envy Germany for so long because they have that strong industry. Well, now, not so much. Maybe it's good to have this diversified economy that we have in Sweden, that you have the raw-based, you know, forest, the mining and so forth products, the machinery and the service sector.
Very interesting. Please, Jonas, brief questions, introduce yourself if there are anybody else.
Yes, hello. My name is Jonas Törnblom. A short reflection here. I had lunch with a friend of mine in Berlin a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about organizational change. And he had been you are a HR director for 5 larger German companies. And I'm not now picking on German companies, this can be any type of companies. But he said that during his career, he'd never came across a situation where the employees felt that they were their responsibility to aid the strategic development of the company. And I think this is something we need to reflect on in this context. We need to mobilize the organizations. But on the other hand, we also have organizations where the senior management don't listen, don't pick up reflections from the lower level. And if we're going to change in this pace, we have to find other ways of mobilizing energy, enthusiasm, innovation, and inspiration from the whole organizations, and also from, as someone said here, from the companies that we want to collaborate with. I think that's the key.
Thanks a lot, Jonas. I'm going to take, there's a few here. Please go ahead. Sorry, first, you, and then, sorry. And then in front of you.
Thank you very much, Pia Wagberg from Insight. Very interesting discussions and presentations. And I'm thinking there's such a great... I visited China just in December, which was a shock to me to see all this. I'm thinking the members of our society in the Western world in general, we have climbed very high up on Maslow's ladder, so we are very fat and happy. Does that make a change on a global scale? I mean, I think the Chinese people might come to that point when they get, you know, when they are developing as well. But we are definitely ahead in that. So how do you think about that? How can we counteract or do something about our fat and happy attitude?
And I'll take 2 more, and I think that's something that I was touching upon. I think that's a very relevant point, which is what I'm saying. People are starting to talk about the next generation in China, perhaps not really as hungry or keen to sacrifice their, you know, or spend all their time at work. Sorry, first you, Lars, and then in the back.
Lars Friberg from Vinnova. Thank you, Tina, for raising the sustainability aspect. I do think that the Chinese have realized they can count on the free trade market working in the food system when crisis will hit, and therefore they're curbing now their imports of soybeans from China and so on. But my question, and what I was missing to some extent from your presentation, is what will the impact of physical AI? You mentioned, Mikko, robotics. I mean, so far there's been shipping maybe 15,000. They're mainly meet and greet and, nice, they dance. But the vision of getting them into factories and what we're seeing in somewhat in the future, more or less unlimited labor, what impact will that have?
Thank you. Great. I think these questions are great because I would also like the panel to think a little bit ahead. Like, what do you see happening? Because as we said, we focused a lot on China's technological strengths, but there are also other factors at play. And I'll take that question, then I'll let the panel respond.
Fredrik Laurel from KTH. On an everyday basis, I meet young people who is in the educational system. I think Swedish strength is or has been the school system. Swedish kids are individualists. They become entrepreneurs. Of course, we don't invest enough in the Swedish school system. That's what we should do. Then we be even stronger as an engineering country. But I would like to reflect from the time when I was a postdoc in the US in the 90s, early 90s. My colleagues at DuPont, where I worked, they said that they had been afraid of the Japanese. The Japanese were catching up on the US very strongly. And they said that there was only one way we can stay ahead of the Japanese. It's to export our culture to the Japanese. It means the way of living, the way of eating, etc. So they also become fat cats. And I mean, isn't that, maybe we stay where we are, and the Chinese will come closer to us, one way or the other, spend money on useless things, watch TV, do TikTok, etc. That's my input. I'm not afraid of the Chinese. I just spent time in Taiwan, and I see tremendous development there. It's also a liberal democracy. I think there's a great strength in that.
Thanks a lot. Great to bring in the whole. So I'll let you react to. We have, I think, a nice range from a comment to some of these questions. Which one? Who would like to start?
I can start.
Yeah.
No, I mean, there's a lot of reflections, good comments. I think, where is China heading? And I think, I mean, for sure, China is going to be super important economic powerhouse for the rest of our lives, right? That's true. But how much will it grow? And I think the jury is still out there. And we talked, I think you mentioned, I mean, it's a middle-income country. And in some sense, I mean, incomes are 1/4 or 20% of the Swedish ones, right? The gap in living standards is probably even larger. Consumption is, the lowest I've seen in any place. It's almost below 40% of GDP. So, I mean, there's a lot of catching up doing there, and I'm not sure if they're going to be able to do it. And that kind of relates to Fredrik's comments about democracy and liberal democracies and so forth. There are almost no countries that have been able to take the leap from being a middle-income country to a high-income country without having more market economy than you have in China, less command economy, more market economy, and having this kind of pluralistic political system. I mean, South Korea and Taiwan are the two cases in that region. So the exceptions to this might be Singapore, but that's a very different country, and some oil-rich kind of based nations. So I think it's going to be an important country. Is it going to overtake it all and become this very wealthy country? I think that's highly uncertain. We just have to wait and see.
Right. And also this question about whether it will grow old before it grows rich, right?
Yeah. That's happening today. I mean,
I think that one of the strengths that China has, and I think it's an East Asian trait, you have it in Korea and Japanese culture as well, is memory. It's historical memory. Knowing where you come from helps you knowing where you want to go. But at the same time, a lot of things are developing with, it's not only China's speed in industrial development, also China's speed in societal development. I mean, there are a lot of fat and less happy young kids in China who are overfed, never get any exercise, they're losing their sight almost because they've spent 10, 12 hours per day studying, etc. And some of them are sent to sort of, slimming down summer camps. They're overweight. So you're already there, and the American culture has definitely been exported. I remember when the first McDonald's opened in Shanghai on Huaihai Road in 1985, but 1 or 2 months after that, I thought, oh, they've opened the second McDonald's that quickly. But I only saw the N, and it was actually a copy called Nancy, local hamburgers. So yes, food culture is bad. But I think that education, yes, and I've met a lot of Chinese friends over the years who are sort of agonizing about sending their kids through the Chinese educational system because it's a torture. If they succeed, fine, but not all of them succeed. And was it worth the while? So some of them, that's one of the reasons maybe why they moved to Europe. They must more sort of work-life balance. And also at school age. So I think that, yes, definitely, we should never be generalizing or categorical about China or about ourselves. Always look at China as a continent, the different parts of China developing at different speeds, and then we can adapt different solutions to those different areas.
Right, thank you. Tina?
Well, yes, I think that one of the major, you've touched upon it already, but I think that one of the major challenges for China going ahead, but also for us, is for China, it's 1.0. In South Korea, it's 0.9, and I'm talking about fertility rates here. So with a fertility rate of 1.0, so one kid for each second couple, the demographics will turn quite quickly in China. They've already experienced that with the one-child policy in the other direction. But I don't think that they have, regardless of their strategic plans, they don't really know how to direct people into having babies. And I think, I mean, they are trying to talk to them, they are trying to lure them, they are trying to hand out more money. So there are a lot of sort of instruments out there, and more will come, but I don't think they have the key. And I think that is something to really keep an eye on in the future. We have a similar problem. I think it's spelled 1.8 in Sweden, 6, 4. I mean, it's really bad as well, but it's not nearly as bad as 1.0.
No, and especially, again...
I don't know what this is going to make with China, but I'm a little bit afraid that they will become more Marxist again. But I don't know. Maybe you have a theory.
This is a fascinating discussion, and thank you so much for having me. 2 thoughts. One, we haven't talked at all about geopolitics today, which is probably fine, but I think we cannot underestimate how much tech developments are currently intertwined with security and strategic developments, especially in the AI field. So all of these questions of entanglement with what is potentially an adversary and strategic adversary, also to us, if we maintain our deep relations with the United States, which is, of course, at stake, I think we cannot have these conversations without at least talked about it. We also talked about Taiwan, which is important. The second is, this is a very open future. We have at least 2, 3, 4 different Chinas at the same time. It's simplifying if you say you have a 30% China and a 70% China. The 30% is a 5-6 trillion economy, bigger than Germany. It's advanced and super fast. But it's also very tired modernity if you go to Beijing these days. I don't feel like this is the place where also most Chinese feel like our future will be written here, right? I mean, this is a deep crisis of confidence in the Chinese society. And bringing all of these pictures together, frankly, is quite difficult and fascinating at the same time. But whatever we can do is, I think it's largely on our side. And that's performing better and integrating Europe more.
Yes. Unfortunately, thanks a lot. Unfortunately, we're at the end of this. I take with me very many things. I thought it was an excellent discussion. I think maybe some of our take-home messages are encouraging policymaking or this collective thinking, this alignment that Anders talked about, that it doesn't just apply to companies, the force of alignment. The other thing, I think, we didn't talk about geopolitics. It was quite nice not to talk about geopolitics for once, but you did mention it also, Anders, with the Silicon Curtain. that was there in a way, but you're totally right, and that's something we could spend a whole nother afternoon on. I think this notion that a lot of it is up to us to think about how we want to handle this challenge. It is a real challenge, and I want to say also, as somebody who grew up in Germany, in Bavaria, not far from Ingolstadt, which is where one of the automotive companies are now clearly struggling, and the towns are struggling as a result, and it is a huge threat to democracy. And what is a threat to democracy is not good for Sweden either, right? And then the final, maybe send off to Mikko to Germany. I can say that also. It would be great if we got our act together in Germany. I think it would be good for all of Europe.
I'll take that.
So with that, I want to thank you all. I think it's exceeded my expectations, made me really happy. I think this was a really important conversation to have. I hope we can continue it. Thank you for coming.